Art teachers of Reddit, do you ever cringe at your students' art? If you have, what made the art so bad? Story 1. I've posted this before, but once I was a real-life model for a college art class. I was clothed and playing guitar for about an hour. As part of my payment, the students gave me their drawings after the teacher quickly graded them after the class. One girl drew a great portrait of me that was very realistic, except she gave me a huge dong that came out of my pants, went down my leg and wrapped around my ankle a few times. She gotta be dash. Story 2. Not a teacher, but when I was in kindergarten we had an art assignment to draw a monster from a story we had read. We drew our monsters until the time ended and I turned mine in. Problem was I gave the monster a dong. They called my parents in and asked me why I drew it like that. I didn't have time to give him pants, was my answer. Edit didn't expect to get upvotes or awards for this. Thank you. Story 3. My art teacher asked me if I was doing drugs in grade 8. I didn't. I guess my drawing was just really bad, or really good. I don't understand art. Story 4. There was one girl who gave me a 3D pen art of a dog. If you don't know what a 3D pen is, it's essentially a pen that melts plastic so you can create 3D shapes out of it. Well, the dog she gave me was something that looked like straight out of a horror movie, like if John Carpenter's The Thing got a hold of a dog. It was a bit unnerving to look at. Sweet girl with the best of intentions. I kept it on my desk for as long as I could. Now it's in a box somewhere in my office. Story 5. As a student we were assigned to draw something we didn't like. I proceeded to draw an incredibly detailed picture of the art teacher. His reaction to a mirror image of him when grading was priceless. I got an A because even though the assignment was of something we hate, it was the most detailed drawing he ever saw come out of the 9th grade art class. Story 6. I teach screenwriting at a college in San Francisco, and honestly, the number of students who can't even string a sentence together is astounding. That's just the beginning. Don't even get me started on the ideas they pitch or attempt to write. If I see one more, guess what, Hollywood, it was all a dream. Endings. I'm going to lose my mind. Story 7. I'm not an art teacher or an art student, but my cousin suffered constant FS in art all throughout high school. Mind you, his art was really good. The problem was, his teacher had a huge bias towards what's considered real art. She said that his art was too surreal and promoted drug use. She's a. Story 8. I didn't teach art but was a teacher. The high school photography club did a photo shoot I assisted with. One of the boys decided to mime jacking off. His classmates snapped a picture of it. Their teacher wasn't paying attention. The picture ended up in yearbook. Story 9. My mom is an art teacher and she used to work in a private boys' school. One day she came home all defeated because she had to give 4 detentions to a group of boys making penises out of clay. Or recently she had a senior cry in her class because mom tried to convince her that painting a grown man sucking on a cow wasn't appropriate for their Catholic school. Or the time she marked an art exam and one of the kids thought the statue was dolphins leaping but it was a running man, and was called the running man. She has a tough time sometimes. Story 10. Not sure if this counts, but I really enjoyed watching my literature teacher. Literature is art cringe. At one of my assignments in high school, we read the classic The Lady and the Tiger and we were supposed to write an ending to it. She read a few of them out loud in front of the class, and mine was one that was randomly selected for this. I don't remember much of it, but a few passages like, he didn't see as the piercing claws ripped his eyeballs from their sockets, he didn't feel as chunks of brain matter were torn from his skull. She clearly hadn't pre-read the one she chose, and she was visibly getting sick as she read. It was great. Story 11. On my teaching practicum, I was observing a boy in art class who totally hated being in art. He was constantly disruptive and hardly did any work. Eventually the teacher coaxed him into doing the final project for the class so he could pass. It was a mixed media assignment. If I recall correctly, he found some tinfoil and painted it brown, and glued it to a painted green background. It was supposed to be a football, I think, but it ended up looking more like a piece of dog poo. I couldn't help but chuckle when I saw it. The extremely low-effort attempt just made me laugh. Other than that, I can't think of any examples of art that really made me cringe. There are definitely cliches in art that you see teenagers make, e.g., one fancy eye, emo fairies, but I see these things as a necessary developmental hurdle for budding artists. Story 12. Obligatory. Not an art teacher, but I am an art student. I don't cringe at individual pieces, but I cringe at people who don't accept criticism. Either their ego gets in the way and they refuse to change anything because they know best, they see all criticism as just your work is and you should feel bad, or they don't bother even listening because they just don't care. I've been in classes where people clearly submitted work last second and didn't pay any attention to the last crit, and it's just so painful listening to everyone try to nail it into their head again. Story 13. I'm an instructor for a college intro drawing course. Some students just aren't as practiced in drawing as other students, and I understand and accept that. Students may have had years of art classes before this one, or this might be the first art class they've ever taken. It's fine. What makes me cringe is when students don't follow the directions for what they're supposed to be drawing. Maybe they're using the wrong media, the wrong composition, or the wrong technique than the ones we're specifically practicing. That's what loses people the most points, and that's what gets pointed out the most harshly in critique. Bro, just listen. Edit. I have some pretty great stories from when I was in undergrad though. Anytime someone used their own naked body as a reference and put the art up for critique, interpretive video using uncredited clips from B-Movie, interpretive video using uncredited clips of Rick and Morty, interpretive Cossack dancing to American Idiot, a charcoal drawing of an anime demon girl with massive. It was very well done though. Painting made by dipping vibrators into paint and then Letting them loose on the paper. Story 14. I took a Film 101 class at the local city college. One of my classmates made a film called Story where his female roommate pissed in a plastic cup in the shower. There were no follow-up questions. I'm not an art teacher, but in 6th grade I made a Gary the Snail, and I never got it back, so Ms. Just wherever you are, I'm mad at you. Story 15. Somewhat related. But when I was in high school I went through this cringy tortured artist writer phase where I looked like this and wrote bad poetry that I posted on my Zanga. During that period my English class were doing projects on Dante's Inferno, and I had the ninth circle, especially the betrayal of family. We could do whatever we wanted, like a drawing, a diorama, etc., as long as it was creative. I was gonna do a music video to the Doors song The End, but everyone that was going to help me with bailed. I was frustrated and decided to write a poem called Fuck the Mother, Kill the Father instead. Now keep in mind this was a Jesuit high school, so this was not the type of thing they wanted there, but I was feeling edgy, so I handed it in. My teacher pulled me aside after class to talk about it. I told him it fit the parameters of the project and I wasn't going to be censored. This teacher really liked me and decided to let me hand it for a grade, but didn't let me present it to the class. I thought it was pretty cool of him, but at the same time I cringe at how I acted and the edginess of it all. Here's the poem for those that are curious. Edit: the parts in quotations are literally taken from the end, not me. Jim Morrison is supposed to be shaman whispering in my ear. Story 16. Obligatory. Not a teacher, but I am a senior at a major art school on the East Coast. I've witnessed enough cringe to last a lifetime, but the ultimate standout was this one artist who only made furry statues. Very detailed, sculpted, painted furry statues. I remember one in particular was a 2-foot-tall panda bear hugging its own penis, which was as large as it was. I never found out who made it, and I did see a couple of smaller ones in exhibitions every now and then, but it sort of became an inside joke amongst my friends. Edit: I did also forget to mention that the large statue was not part of an exhibition, but was just left in the front window of a studio building for an entire semester. It was weird to walk by it every day. Story 17. Yes, one I can answer. I used to be a high school art teacher with a specialism in audio-visual art. I've seen some things, man. Give kids a camera and they pretty much will film anything. I learned to enforce strict time boundaries for everything these kids made after sitting through 2 hours of the worst movie ever. It was basically one long shot of a few girls sitting on the couch pretending to smoke a joint and getting stoned. Now mind you, this was in a really religious region with fairly young kids, 1,112 years old, who had never smoked weed before, so it was basically their interpretation of what being high would be like. And their interpretation was basically a super hysterical dare ad. There was lots of freaking out, screaming and panicking, and at the end they all owed in the most dramatic fashion. Of course, the most cringe bad acting you've ever witnessed. And did I mention it lasted 2 hours? It was dreadful and they were so proud of it too. I made sure to put it on a DVD in the hopes they'd come across it 20 years from then and feel the same horror as I did back then. Vindication. Obligation to say I'm not an art teacher, but I did watch our teacher visually cringe at a student. It was ceramics one. We were learning the very basics of ceramics work, so nobody was an expert. However, there is always that one person who expects all of their art to be a superb masterpiece that should be in museums for centuries. This class had not one, but two. They were mother and daughter too. It was community college. We were learning how to make a simple box. Nothing too complex. We were supposed to turn these boxes into lanterns. Daughter decides she's too good for a box and wants to make a globe. Teacher had to explain that wasn't the assignment and she didn't know the techniques for it. She ignores him because she's an artist and tried anyways. Before it finally collapsed, it looked like just a sad gray lump. Of course, instead of just doing the assignment, she threw a fit and left early. Next assignment, we had to make large-scale goblets. We were just stacking strips of flat clay and shaping them, and it was Mom's turn to snap. She wanted to make a not a statue of a naked woman. The teacher explained again this was not the assignment, but was once again ignored. I watched this woman scream, cry, and smash her sculpture at least 15 times when it wasn't turning out the way she wanted it to. I felt so bad for that professor. He was an amazing teacher and I loved his class, but those two made it insufferable for everyone else. Story 18. TBH. I spent my entire year 8, 12 to 13 years old art class cringing. Not so much because of bad art but bad class quality. Basically, my teacher left at the end of the first half term, so we started in September. She left the third week of October to be the head of art at my cousin's school. The year is 3 terms long. The school decided not to replace her until the next academic year, the following September. So for 5 terms, we had teachers from other departments covering our classes. The school had a book thing for art cover, a little book of exercises for students to do when their teacher was sick. All told, it had about 6 things. As it was supposed to be for single lessons, the school made all her classes use that book in every class 3 hours a week for the whole rest of the year. It never occurred to them to have another art teacher come up with some more for variety. And you couldn't freedom because you had to be able to point to an exercise and say I'm doing that one when asked. Tried them all, found 5 of them utterly uninteresting, so I ended up just doing the exercise draw a dragon every class for nearly 9 months. Not one person in my class gained any appreciation for art that year. One guy wanted to be an artist professionally. His mother, who happened to be a teacher at the school, kicked up so much stink that they moved him to another class. Story 19. Music teacher here who has also taught visual art. I thought I'd tell you why your question isn't great. Some students I've taught are now professional musicians. When they arrived at high school though, they were 13-year-old babies, naive, inexperienced and new. they were all bad at jazz because it's new to them. Just like how any great musician starts. Why do I think your question is poor? Because every great artist starts off awful. There's no shame or cringe in it, it's process. I had a student who could do life stills in stunning realism and depth, so we got her into abstract and new styles and mediums. She was awful, there's no mockery. That's how we progress. She failed, learned, improved, eventually to where she had mastery. Now she has more weapons to choose from. She was confident and willing to expose her weakness so she could improve. The only time I've cringed is from something that reflects no effort, and it's not from the piece. It's from knowing the student is willing to put their name on something with no effort and no progress. To willingly allow that as a definition of who they are, that's cringe. Story 20. I'm not a teacher, I'm a student, but one time I was in this life drawing class, and we had a model, we were sketching away, and I draw the lady, and at break everyone looks at each other's art and the model takes a stretch. Well, mine was very good, top-notch rendition. Except I accidentally made her shoulders too wide, which made the entire body too wide and, well, the slightly plump figure of the model looked absolutely morbidly obese. Despite this, the drawing really was very good. Several of my classmates gathered around my easel, and they were very loudly talking about how amazing it was. It looks just like her. And then I saw the model, who overheard these statements and looked up to see the drawing that so perfectly captured her body. She died so hard inside. I said very loudly to the other students, "Thank you, but I drew her way too wide. I accidentally made her look very heavy. She doesn't look like that at all." Story 21. I think I made my art teacher cringe, but I'm still kinda mad about it. When I was young and in art class, my teacher hung my landscape painting upside down for an art show. I was a kid and so upset. Now I'm an adult and upset that it took years after that for an adult to realize I'm color deficient. I don't see blue and green correctly, so apparently I had blue grass and a green sky. Can't really fault her, I guess. Story 22. In the art high school of my city, a 15-year-old made a rather shitty-looking painting out of her period blood as her big project for the year. Two guys from the same school got expelled because they made art in the bathroom, used their own as clay on top of the toilet lid. One of the guys transferred into my art course in another school. Decent guy if you forget the ordeal. Story 23. Personally not an art teacher, but I took many years of art classes growing up and had a wild art teacher in high school. She once gave us a 45-minute slideshow of pictures of the seagulls she saw outside her window for absolutely no reason. Another time she spent an entire class telling us the story of how life is like a donkey and a skittle. She once ripped the drawing I had been doing for weeks in half to make it more conceptual. Without telling anyone, she left 2 weeks before spring semester ended. Years later, she occasionally sends me a message on LinkedIn to see how I'm doing. Story 24. I'd love my high school art teacher to respond. Year 8, doing abstract art, and she told me that my abstract painting was the worst piece of art she had seen in her 25 years of teaching. 20 years later, and I'm still wondering how the heck I could get that feedback for freaking abstract art. Any art teachers care to explain? Story 25. It's the opposite, but I still must share this. The entire class cringed when we found out that our art teacher painted herself naked and posted it on her Instagram. Story 26. Not a teacher, but I took quite a few high school art classes. I did cringe once for one poor girl. She had signed up for AP art and was really trying super hard, but it was painfully clear even to me that she was missing a lot of technical skills. She couldn't draw well, and as we were a 2D focus class everything else struggled because she was missing that underpinning. I hope that wherever she is she's still doing art and enjoying herself. Story 27. My art 11 teacher waved me over at the end of the year and said, "Listen, I'll give you a 50 if you promise never to take art again." I took the deal. Story 28. Art teacher. The only art that makes me cringe is the things people copy and repeat without a second thought, and then they call it art, because it's well made. Children making hearts, rainbows, Pokemons, and the flags of their country, and don't ask them to do anything else BC they cannot. Teenagers making penises, vulvas, manga figures, satanic goats, name tags, over and over again. Adults making the same landscape, the same naked lady, the same vase of flowers time after time. It is difficult to make people understand that art is not about choosing this technique and making this one theme perfectly well. Art is much more about exploration, uncertainty, experimentation, and subjectivity than about making a perfectly realistic drawing. But as in all types of education, people are very afraid of confronting their own limitations and they like to keep it safe and be praised, so they endlessly and obsessively repeat the thing they think they can do best. My favorite students are toddlers, fearless, original little chaotic people. Many art teachers I know share this preference. Story 29. So not an art teacher, but in my art class this one dude kept drawing naked anime girls, and the teacher was definitely like, "WTF man, I didn't ask for this." Story 30. I don't teach art, but I do teach performing arts. The cringiest thing students do is pick angsty-klitsch topics for their performances, and they always think they're so deep and original. For example, I teach one topic where they have to create a play with a political message. It should be about something relevant for their time, i.e. COVID, Donald Trump, BLM movement, influence of things like TikTok would all be relevant topics. They always pick generic things like bullying or body image issues, and they always do the exact same story. I tell them every year to pick something that's in the news at the moment because then their piece will actually be original. Their response is always, I know this topic gets done a lot, but our take on it is completely original and you'll be really surprised and blown away at what we have planned. I never am. If you watch the SNL school theater show parodies, they are spot on with what I'm dealing with. Story 31. I teach English to Japanese high school students. A girl in class yesterday was drawing a poster for her emotions presentation. She wanted to show an injury, so she drew a finger sticking up with a line across near the top. She tried to add curled up fingers, but it was at the edge of the page and there was only room for one curled up finger on either side of the sticking up finger. She was super embarrassed and called me over to ask if it was okay, whispering, does it look like finger or other thing? It definitely looked like other thing. Story 32. Not an art teacher, but someone who took several art classes. The main thing that makes me cringe is the sheer number of arrogant bad artists in the world. It's their style, so they need to brag to everyone they know about how genius they are. Story 33. I was the art student in a grade 12 high school class. By that level, most of us were pretty good. Also, we had high quality materials and a good teacher. Most of us were trying out things inspired by what we learned for art history, and trying out different mediums. But one girl insisted on just painting stuff like unicorns, and those cheesy wolf head and eagle type paintings. Story 34. I actually have a story of being on the receiving end of this. For context, the school I go to is well respected in my country, so it was not uncommon for venues to request to display a student's work or to ask for students to sing live for them. On the occasion in question, the largest art gallery in the country, Gallery X, had asked my school to submit inspired art to be out on display. The school agreed and said that they would submit 5 pieces of work, 1 piece per year for years 9 to 13. Back to the story. I hated art growing up, but it was a mandatory subject until you got to choose your subjects in year 10. Needless to say, I dropped the subject ASAP. Despite hating the subject, I still put effort into my work and some of it wasn't that bad. However, at the same time, I would not hide away from expressing my views when we were given a task that I didn't see a point to, even if the teacher was in earshot. Needless to say, my relationship with the art department faculty wasn't the best. My teacher at the time particularly had it in for me. He was one of those teachers that has the view that their subject should be your most important subject, regardless of your future ambitions. If he thought that you weren't prioritizing art, then he would make your life. Yet again, I hated art as a subject, he knew this, but I would still do any work set to the best of my ability. We had just finished a project where we had to mix different pigments to create our own unique color. Being colorblind, I struggled a lot as I literally could not differentiate between half of the pigments. I gave it my all but ended up giving up halfway through the project. My teacher hated me for giving up. In his defense, he had tried to make it as easy as possible for me, but I hated the subject and saw a way out, so I took it. Once that project was finished, my teacher told us that Gallery X has asked that we create some inspired art. We were basically shown 5 different paintings that we were supposed to recreate in our own way. There was a big fuss about this. People were saying that art schools would be giving out scholarships, that there was a 10,000 reward and other nonsense that 14-year-olds make up, but nevertheless everyone wanted to be the one have their painting in Gallery X, so for the next month and a half in my art classes we would work on our piece. After the first week of working my piece, the excitement of the new project wore off and so did my eagerness in lessons. My teacher noticed this and went from complimenting my work to yelling at me about what I was doing wrong. By the 4th week I was over the project and just wanted to be done with this. I dragged myself to each lesson, counting down the days until the deadline of the project. After what seemed like a year to 14 years old me, the second last lesson arrives. This lesson was not for final touches or anything like that. My teacher had decided that he should review what each student has done well and where they could have improved. He walks round the classroom, complimenting everyone's work, until he gets to mine. I don't remember exactly what he said, but I'm pretty sure none of it was positive. I do remember, however, how he finished talking about mine. You can tell that Opie hasn't given this any thought and hasn't taken this seriously. That stung like a because yes, I had lost interest in it, but I had still worked hard in lessons and given it my best shot. The bell then went and I sulked out of the class with my tail between my legs. The last lesson finally comes and I can't wait to be over with this stupid project. This lesson was the big one too. The judges from Gallery X were coming to school to judge all of the work. They come into our class, do all the formalities. These all look so good. I have no idea how we can decide on only one ECT. Then they start walking around the room muttering to each other. The whole class is stood silently at the back trying to hear what they are saying. They do a full lap of the room, then walk back over to my spot. I don't even notice this as I had tuned out after they had looked at the second painting. They then ask the teacher whose work they are stood over. He looks at them almost in disbelief as he gestures to me. I snap out of my daydream and just smile politely with no idea what is going on. The judges then confer for a while, whilst my teacher and I frantically try and figure out what is going on. Finally, after about 5 minutes of mumbling, they say that they want to shortlist it to potentially be shown in Gallery X. I look on at them in shock, then yet again smile politely and say thank you. I cannot begin to describe the look on my teacher's face. I don't think I have ever seen someone more confused, angry and disappointed all at the same time. My teacher then begrudgingly thanks the judges and walks them to the door. He thanks them again as they leave, then stumbles back to the class. He doesn't even congratulate me on my work, he just defeatedly says, "Good work everyone. As a reward he'll put on a documentary for you all to watch." And he did just that, not saying another thing until the end of class. Later on that week I got an email from Gallery X asking for my permission to display my work. of which I happily said yes to. To summertime, the work that he disrespected and said that no effort into, was selected from 192 others, got featured in the biggest art gallery in the country. Hope you enjoyed. Story 35. Not an art teacher. I have many skills but am beyond awful at art. Took an art class where a teacher was proudly lecturing that there is no wrong or bad art, just our best efforts. This was at the end of the 4th class. He passed my desk, looked down, then said, well, okay, maybe there is bad art, and kept walking. Still cracks me up today to think about. Don't feel bad for me, my art is horrendous. Story 36. It wasn't art, I was drawing a graph in physics class. The teacher was just walking up and down. He saw my graph and said in my native language, looks like crow. It was too funny, I didn't feel insulted at all. Honestly, he had a point. Kaka damn pole undo. Story 37. Not an art teacher, but I was a teacher at a school in Stockholm. All of the children in kindergarten drew pictures for their art class to hang up. One child's picture definitely looked like a penis and had to be hung up as well to keep things fair. I'll never forget walking down the stairs to see that in the hallway, and it gave me a good laugh every time. Story 38. Reading through this thread is giving me two major reactions. One of amusement at remembering similar cringy things I saw from my peers at school, and one of dread as I remember the endless parade of cringy things I submitted. My art tutor at uni told us a cautionary tale of a girl who didn't turn up to any crits for her entire second year, and then submitted 4 drawings of dragons for her final piece. All second year's final piece had to be an interpretation of a book. It didn't meet the brief and apparently were very juvenile and basic composition-wise, and had liberal use of glitter pens. She defended her work telling them she'd gotten loads of excellent feedback on DeviantArt. To this day my tutor hates DeviantArt. Story 39. I am not a teacher, but for an assignment for art class in the 8th grade we were supposed to make caricatures of famous artworks, and so I chose Jacques Callot, The Temptation of St. Anthony, and I made Satan aka the big dragon looking thing into Hitler and put a huge Nazi banner behind him, and I named it The Invasion of Poland. My art teacher walked up to me and looked at my drawing and squinted trying to get in all the detail, looked at me and told me don't you think the flag is a bit much? I mean you already have Hitler and all, and promptly forced me to replace it with something else. Story 40. I'm an art teacher teaching kids in China. And as long as the student is making an effort, whether they have brilliant talent or not, that's all that matters, and I'll shower them with praise regardless. I find that the Chinese education system bashes out anything creative in them and swaps it with memorizing, extra classes, constant exams, tests, and homework. Chinese students have brutal childhoods in school. To answer the question though, one student covered a large piece of paper in red paint, used his hands and everything. And when questioned about it said it represented murder. Maybe not a cringing moment, but it definitely made me question what kind of head been watching lately. Story 41. A few years ago I had a very talented student. He could paint almost anything, but he had one problem that kept him from being the best. In every picture he painted, he drew a penis, not a big obvious one, but a small one hidden in the background. It became almost a game with me. Every time I would grade his art, I had to find the penis. Story 42. I remember when I was in elementary school I had a cool idea to draw a picture of a bunch of eyes looking at you out of a black background, but I never got around to drawing the background. So my teacher goes up and asks me what are you drawing, and I told her eyes, and then a few minutes later it dawned on me. I was drawing a ton of pairs of, so I tired to add eyebrows, but that just made it worse, so I threw the whole thing away. Story 43. I'm a fresher in animation, and I had to look at K-pop and anime fan arts drawn by other students for an hour today in my online class. I regret my life choices. Story 44. I taught Art K5 for a few years. I never cringed at a student's work. I was thrilled when a kid was able to pick up whatever medium we were working with and enjoy their time in my class. I just wanted art to be a positive experience, and hope they take that with them as they grow. Story 45. I actually am an art teacher, but this thread has so many comments from non-art teachers now that it is redundant. In short, I love all the art my students create. I really do. Some of them aren't good at it, but I still like the charm. One kid wrote when he was drawing a Coke can though. Story 46. Art teacher of 17 years. I've cringed at students' work process that is so fast and careless that it produces what amounts to near garbage. On the other hand, those kids might suffer from abuse. I tend to sit with them and show them how to relax a little and enjoy the process. I tell my students you choose good work or quick work. You don't get both. Once I had a 3rd grader show me a drawing of 2L calving. I looked at him and he had a straight face. I shrugged because if he doesn't make a big deal about it, neither will I. Check out the MOBA, the Museum of Bad Art. Everyone makes their share of, it's part of the creative process. Story 47. When I was a grad student I was given a large class for my first teaching assignment, and oh boy, one of my students did work that to this day my grad school buddies and I occasionally bring up. There were 2 works that stand out. 1. Students were asked to draw a diver as they fell into the water. The student in question drew the diver diving into a woman's vagina. 2. Students were asked to draw a comic book strip. The student draw an outer space gang rape scene. He said he was anti-rape when the class got silent after looking at his work. It was graphic. Story 48. In digital art illustrations class in college, a bunch of people drew big tit furry art, Harley Quinn in sexy poses with bad anatomy or a hybrid of both. During the art show, the teacher had to hang up these pieces in the hallway on the walls. It's mandatory all art classes participate. It was so weird walking down the school halls and seeing furry art and badly drawn Harley Quinn art. Story 49. Not a teacher, but when I was in 10th grade, I once went into art class and saw a row of drying acrylic paintings done by a previous class. It wasn't, but some other kid had painted Ghostface hanging from a cross, while two black-clad teenagers with dark long hair, boots and trench coats stood by his feet, bowing with their hands crossed over their chests. I was a repressed goth at the time. That made me cringe. Story 50. In primary school, when I was 9, I asked what the word meant on the newspaper under our art project. The poor trainee teacher panicked and painted over it. I remember the word to this day. Excuse me, miss, what's rape? Story 51. I have previously taught both design and visual arts for senior students. Hey, race a secret. If a student is capable of producing good work, I and my colleagues are pretty straightforward with our criticism and opinions. This is because we know that we can push these students to develop better work, or further their understanding. If a student isn't any good, but trying, some of us heap on the praise and move on. I have cringed many times. Story 52. When I was teaching EFL, my students had a group assignment that involved drawing a movie poster of a story that they wrote. One group handed in a picture of a monkey sitting on a stool in 13 profile, with a box of tissues in the table next to it, clearly masturbating. My reaction when I saw it while grading the assignments was somewhere between cringe and laughter. My co-teacher was less than pleased when I showed it to her. It ended with a group of very embarrassed 7th grade boys trudging into the teacher's office to apologize while being yelled at in Korean.